Reconstruction was destroyed because the Democrat Party is evil.
This is a diabolical, evil, nasty man.
Mark Levin, a well-known conservative commentator, has recently stirred things up in the political world by dropping what he claims is the ultimate U.S. government secret about how presidents are really controlled. This shocking revelation, the result of years of political talk, debates, and speculation, gives us a peek into the complicated inner workings of American governance. Levin's claims not only raise questions about the integrity of the presidency, but also challenge the entire framework of U.S. democracy. This whole situation, full of intrigue, points to a hidden mechanism within the government that Levin argues has been set up to influence and control the highest office in the country. The implications of what he's saying go way beyond just the current administration, shaking the very foundations of how Americans view their government. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. At the heart of Levin's expose is the idea that once presidents take office, they aren't as free and independent as we're led to believe. He suggests that a secretive group of government institutions, intelligence agencies, and powerful elites have a huge say in what the commander-in-chief does. While this isn't exactly a brand new theory in the world of conspiracy, Levin's strong claim that this control runs deep within the U.S. government really brings the idea into clearer focus. What makes his revelation stand out is that it's not just recycling old suspicions. Instead, it provides a detailed account that seems to connect various actions, decisions, and events over the years into a clear story. So, Levin talks about this secret system that really hinges on intelligence agencies like the CIA, FBI, and NSA. These organizations were set up to keep our national security in check, but now there are claims that they're actually messing with how presidents make decisions. They gather a ton of info, not just on foreign threats, but also on the president himself. By using all this data, these agencies can sway or even control what comes out of the White House. Levin calls this a deep state stranglehold, which basically means that no matter who gets elected, the president is stuck following a certain agenda. Levin's take suggests that there's a whole system of blackmail and coercion going on. He hints that both past and current presidents get hit with sensitive, potentially damaging info about their personal lives or political careers. This info is kept safe in intelligence agency vaults and acts as leverage. If a president starts to stray from the script or tries to push policies that don't fit the deep state's interests, this data can be used to nudge them back on track, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so much. He argues that over the years, intelligence agencies and some political players have really fine-tuned this soft control approach, making sure presidents stay in line without needing any big scandals or drama. This raises some serious questions about how much freedom a president really has and what power looks like in the U.S. government. If they can be controlled like this, it makes you wonder about the whole democratic process. What's the point of voting if the person who wins is just a puppet? Levin's argument suggests that voters might be picking figureheads instead of true leaders. You know, the policies that presidents push for and put into action aren't really theirs. They're actually coming from some hidden elites pulling the strings behind the scenes. Levin gives us a pretty bleak view of a democratic process that's been taken over by a powerful few, leaving the American public mostly clueless about who's really in charge. If what Levin says is right, it means that things like American foreign policy, domestic laws, and even big decisions about war and peace are being handled by unelected folks who work behind closed doors. These people, who don't have to answer to the public, can really steer the course of U.S. history. Levin's claims bring back those long-standing worries that the American government is being run by a network of insiders who use the presidency like a puppet for their own agendas. That's a pretty scary thought. The most powerful position in the world might not actually be that powerful, but instead just a pawn in a bigger game played by those lurking in the shadows. Levin also talks about how the media fits into this whole control system. The mainstream press, which is usually thought of as the fourth estate, is said to be in on this too. He argues that the media has a two-part role: First, they help create and spread the accepted narrative, and second, they shut down any voices or stories that might uncover the hidden influence over the presidency. Levin claims that media outlets have been used by these elites to shape public opinion and manufacture consent. He points out how major news organizations tend to be on the same page about big issues like war, international relations, and even domestic surveillance, which he sees as proof of this collusion. He believes that whoever controls the narrative controls public opinion, and by that logic, they end up controlling the president too. You know, one of the craziest things Levin talks about is just how long this whole system of control has supposedly been around. He's not saying it's something new. It's been brewing for decades, maybe even longer. He brings up some pretty significant moments in American history, like the whole Contra thing with JFK's assassination, the Watergate scandal, and even some of the more recent political messes. Levin argues that these events, which people often brush off as just random happenings or the work of a few rogue individuals, are actually part of a bigger plan to keep a grip on the presidency. According to him, these key moments show a system that kicks back into gear whenever it needs to keep things the same. He believes that presidents can't really act on their own because of all the layers in the federal government. Levin describes a complicated bureaucratic setup that's super hard for any president to break down. The career bureaucrats, who are kind of shielded from the political game, often end up having more say in how things go than the elected officials do. He calls them a sort of permanent government, often dubbed the deep state, that sticks around no matter who's in the White House and keeps policies consistent, no matter who's calling the shots. So it seems like the president is just a temporary figurehead, someone who can change the message or the image, but is really held back by this massive network of bureaucrats and officials who are more loyal to their own interests than to what the president wants to do. On top of that, Levin throws in another twist by mentioning foreign interests. He hints that some of the control over U.S. presidents might actually come from outside sources, like foreign governments or big multinational companies. Levin points out how American leaders often get tangled up with foreign entities and how these connections can be used to twist their policies. For example, big corporations with global interests can really influence things like trade deals, military actions, or economic sanctions. He suggests that some presidents, no matter what they say publicly, might end up acting more in favor of foreign powers than in the best interest of the American people, thanks to pressure or financial incentives behind the scenes. This adds a whole new level of complexity to the already messy situation Levin talks about. He also dives into the psychological and emotional strain this whole system puts on presidents. While we often think of the presidency as a position of great power and prestige, Levin argues that those in the role can feel really isolated, pressured, and even scared. He describes the heavy emotional and mental load of having to navigate a constant web of manipulation, where every move they make is under a microscope and could be turned against them. Presidents might start off with big dreams for the country, but Levin says they quickly come to see the limits of their power. This feeling of being trapped, he argues, is why many presidents leave office looking older and worn out. Juggling the demands of leading the nation while also dealing with the hidden forces trying to control them can take a serious toll on their mental health. Even with this pretty grim picture Levin paints, he hints that there are times when presidents push back against this system of control. He shares stories of leaders who have tried to make bold changes that challenge the norm, only to face fierce pushback from within the government and the media. While some of these efforts get squashed or watered down, Levin suggests that the very act of resisting shows the tension between the elected president and the established powers that want to keep things the same. These moments, though rare, give us a peek at what the presidency could be like without all those hidden influences. Levin's insights leave us with a lot more questions than answers. If the presidency is really being run by a shadow government, what does that mean for American democracy moving forward? Can we break down this control system, or is it too ingrained to change? Levin's expose doesn't really give us any clear answers, but it definitely highlights how big the problem is. It pushes us to rethink what we know about power, democracy, and how our government works. Some folks might brush off Levin's claims as just paranoid ramblings or conspiracy theories, but others will probably see them as proof of what they've suspected all along about American politics. Levin's shocking insights into how U.S. presidents might be controlled have sparked a lot of debate, and it's easy to see why. While his initial points are pretty alarming, the deeper issues surrounding this alleged control system, who's behind it, and what it could mean for the future are worth diving into, especially considering that the highest office in the country could be manipulated. Levin's statements make us think about the broader effects on our national identity, international relations, and what U.S. leadership might look like down the line. One big thing that needs more attention is the idea that this control might go beyond just the presidency. Although Levin mainly focuses on the president, his claims hint that the whole government system could be wrapped up in this influence and pressure. If intelligence agencies and powerful elites really have such a tight grip on the president, it makes you wonder if other parts of the government, like Congress and the courts, are feeling that same pressure. Members of Congress have a lot of power when it comes to making laws and shaping policies that affect everything from our daily lives to international affairs. Levin's revelations raise a pretty unsettling question. If the president can be manipulated, what about lawmakers? Could they be influenced behind the scenes? Sure, the presidency is the most high-profile and powerful political role, but if more than just the executive branch is compromised, it could really mess with the checks and balances that are supposed to keep power in check. Levin's revelations hint at a bigger issue where our democratic institutions might be getting chipped away at, with key officials at all levels of government possibly being pressured, blackmailed, or tempted to push certain agendas. This raises some serious questions about the legal system, especially the judiciary, and how vulnerable it might be to outside influence. We usually think of the judiciary as the fair and impartial judge of justice. But if the president and Congress can be manipulated, then it's not hard to see how the courts could be swayed too. Levin's claims make us wonder if the decisions made by the U.S. Supreme Court, which have a huge impact on our laws and how we interpret the Constitution, are really free from outside pressure. If judges and justices can be influenced or coerced, that's a huge problem for the rule of law. The whole legal system is supposed to be built on fairness, equality, and justice. But Levin's claims suggest that these core principles might be at risk, opening the door for outside forces to steer the law in ways that benefit only a select few. This makes us rethink what we really believe about the integrity of the American political system as a whole. A presidency that's controlled wouldn't just be a solo act. It would need a whole network of collusion and manipulation across different branches of government. It raises the scary idea that there could be a massive, coordinated effort to keep things running in a way that benefits just a small group of powerful elites. The thought of such a deep conspiracy is pretty unsettling, hinting that the democratic institutions we've trusted for so long might just be fronts for something much more powerful and hidden. Levin's claims really have a ripple effect that goes beyond just the U.S. Since America is a major player on the world stage, it has a huge impact on global issues. The way the U.S. handles its foreign policy can influence everything from trade deals to military actions. If the president is being swayed by a hidden group, then U.S. foreign policy might not actually reflect what the American people want or even make sense from a strategic point of view. Instead, it could be all about what a small, powerful clique wants, working behind the scenes. The implications of this are pretty mind-blowing because it suggests that decisions about war, peace, and international partnerships are being made without the public even knowing what's really going on. Take a look at all the military actions the U.S. has jumped into over the years, like the Vietnam War or the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. We often hear these conflicts framed as necessary for national security or as efforts to spread democracy. But Levin's insights make us wonder if those reasons are the real deal or just a cover for something else, like serving the interests of those pulling the strings behind the curtain. If military choices are being made not to keep the country safe, but to push the agendas of these unseen players, it could explain why some wars just seem to drag on forever, with little benefit for the U.S. or its citizens. It might be that these long-lasting conflicts are more about financial or political gains that don't really hold up to public scrutiny. Plus, Levin's claims give us a fresh perspective on how the U.S. interacts with its friends and foes. The tricky alliances the U.S. has with countries like the UK, Israel, and Japan, as well as the tense relationships with places like Russia, China, and Iran, could all be influenced by these hidden forces. Levin's suggestion that foreign interests might be pulling the strings when it comes to the U.S. president is pretty alarming. It makes you wonder if America's actions on the global stage are really being influenced by other countries instead of being based on what's best for the U.S. If that's the case, then our foreign policy could just be a show for some powerful global elites who have their own agendas tied to certain alliances or conflicts. Take a look at the economic sanctions we impose on various countries or the trade deals we make. These decisions have huge impacts on global markets, but they might not be as independent as we think. If Levin is onto something, then sanctions, trade agreements, and international diplomacy could just be tools for this hidden elite to manipulate things for their own gain. The idea that a small group could be controlling America's economic and diplomatic moves is pretty unsettling. It might explain why some policies stick around even when a lot of people are against them or they clearly aren't working. Levin's insights also make us rethink what the president really does when it comes to domestic policy. We usually see the president as the main person shaping laws on everything from healthcare to education to the economy. But if the president is being controlled, like Levin claims, then those policies might not really reflect what the people want or even what the president believes in. Instead, they could just be dictated by the interests of those elites pulling the strings. This raises some big questions about political promises and presidential campaigns. If presidents know they have limited freedom to act, how can they honestly promise to push for certain policies once they're in office? Levin's take suggests that a lot of campaign promises might just be empty words meant to win votes, never really intended to be followed through. Plus, the idea that domestic policy could be influenced like this opens the door to thinking that entire sectors of the U.S. economy, like healthcare, education, and energy, are being manipulated for the benefit of these unseen interests. For example, the U.S. healthcare system is one of the most expensive and complicated in the world, and it's been a hot topic in political discussions for a long time. Levin's insights make us wonder if the problems with healthcare reform are really about different opinions on policy, or if they're just powerful interests, especially in the pharmaceutical and insurance industries, trying to protect their own agendas. The energy sector is in the same boat. It's super important for the U.S. economy and national security, but it could also be swayed by these hidden forces that prioritize their profits over what's good for the public. Levin's points also make us think about what leadership really means. If the president is being pulled by strings, then the traits we usually admire in leaders, like courage, vision, and independence, might not even matter anymore. It turns the presidency into more of a role where compliance is key, rather than true leadership. Presidents who stand up against this control could end up sidelined, sabotaged, or even ousted due to scandals or impeachment. This raises some serious concerns about the safety of political leaders who try to break away from this system. Levin suggests that presidents who want to be independent might face backlash, which could explain some of the political messes and crises we've seen in various administrations over the years. Plus, Levin's claims make us rethink what democracy really is. The U.S. has always prided itself on being a shining example of democracy, where people get to choose their leaders through fair elections. But if presidents are really being controlled, as Levin says, then that whole democratic process feels like a joke. Elections wouldn't be about picking someone who truly represents what the people want. Instead, it would just be about choosing a figurehead who follows the agenda laid out by the elites. This really puts a dent in the whole idea of democratic governance, right? It makes it seem like the real decisions are being made behind closed doors, away from the public's view. If Levin's claims hold water, then it feels like the American people have been tricked into thinking they actually have a say in democracy, when in reality, their votes might not mean much at all. That could seriously shake things up when it comes to voter engagement, political activism, and trust in the government. If folks start to believe their votes don't matter, they might just tune out of the political scene, leading to lower voter turnout, more apathy, and even some civil unrest. If Levin's revelations catch on, we could see a major crisis of confidence in American democracy, with people calling for real change or reform. It's interesting to think that both the Democratic and Republican parties, even though they seem to clash on issues like taxes, healthcare, and social policies, might actually be pushing the same hidden agenda. Levin's insights could mean that the big political debates we have, like left versus right or liberal versus conservative, are just distractions from the real issues. The parties might look like they're battling for different futures, but if they're both being influenced by the same unseen powers, then neither is really fighting for what the people want. This idea changes how we view party loyalty and the divide between ideologies. A lot of voters pick a party thinking that it reflects their values and interests. But if the presidents from both sides are being pulled by the same elites, what does that say about the policies they push? It kind of implies that party platforms are less about actual change and more about keeping up the illusion of choice and democracy. You know, the way people get all fired up about their favorite political party might be based on a bit of a trick. While we think decisions are being made out in the open, it turns out that the real power players are calling the shots behind the curtain for both sides. This isn't just about party politics. It digs into how we see ourselves in relation to our government. Levin really makes us think, is American democracy actually listening to us? Or has it been taken over by some hidden forces that want to keep things stable, even if that means leaving real democratic engagement in the dust? If that's the case, then a lot of Americans' feeling of having a say in politics might just be smoke and mirrors. The whole political show, campaigns, debates, elections, could just be a clever distraction from where the real power lies. This brings up some serious questions about what's next for populist movements in the U.S. Recently, both the Democrats and Republicans have seen a surge in populist groups challenging the establishment. You've got folks like Bernie Sanders on the left and Donald Trump on the right, who've really tapped into a lot of people's frustrations by acting like they're outsiders ready to shake things up. But Levin's point suggests that even these so-called game changers could still be caught up in the same old power dynamics once they take office. If leaders who come in promising to disrupt the system find themselves stuck under the influence of these hidden elites, what real chance do we have for change? Levin's take implies that the control is so deep-rooted that even the most radical leaders will feel boxed in once they're in the White House. That's a tough pill to swallow for anyone who believes in the potential of populist movements to bring about real change. It makes you wonder if no matter how much energy and enthusiasm these movements generate, the system is just too tough to crack. The conversation goes way beyond just the presidency and dives into how the whole government works. If there are elites pulling the strings behind the scenes and messing with the political process, it makes sense that their influence reaches into important government agencies too. The massive bureaucracy of the U.S. government, from regulatory bodies to defense contractors, could all be part of this same web of control. These organizations, which have a lot of power in shaping policies and enforcing laws, might not be as neutral or unbiased as they like to think they are. Take the Department of Defense, for instance. It has one of the biggest budgets in the federal government and oversees a super powerful military. If Levin's claims about presidential control hold true, then the military-industrial complex might be a major player in this game of manipulation. Defense contractors, intelligence agencies, and even high-ranking military folks could all be part of this elite network that makes sure presidents stick to a set agenda. The implications here are pretty wild. It suggests that decisions about war, peace, and national security aren't just about keeping the country safe. They might also be about serving the hidden agendas of these elites, and it's not just the military. Regulatory agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, or the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, could be in on it too. These agencies are supposed to enforce laws and regulations that affect nearly every part of American life. from the environment to telecommunications and finance. If they're influenced by the same hidden elites that have a grip on the presidency, then their decisions might not really be about the public good at all, but instead about what benefits those pulling the strings. This could explain why certain industries, like fossil fuels or telecommunications, seem to hold on to their power and influence, even when there's public outcry or scientific evidence calling for change. Levin's insights also bring up the bigger issue of surveillance and privacy in today's world. If intelligence agencies like the NSA are part of the control game, as Levin suggests, it makes you wonder how they're using surveillance to keep that power in check. Over the last few years, the U.S. government has seriously ramped up its mass surveillance efforts, with the NSA scooping up tons of data on both foreign targets and American citizens. This whole surveillance setup could be one of the ways the elites keep an eye on and control not just the president, but the whole political scene and maybe even the general public. That's pretty concerning for our civil liberties and privacy rights. If this surveillance is being used not really for national security, as they often claim, but to keep a grip on the political process, it goes against the core values of freedom and autonomy that the U.S. was built on. Levin's point suggests that the surveillance state isn't just about fighting terrorism or law enforcement. It's also about keeping politicians and dissenters in line. This might explain why there's bipartisan support for some surveillance measures, even when a lot of people are against them. One of the scariest things Levin talks about is that this control system may keep feeding itself, making it hard to break down or change. You know, the folks in charge of the presidency and other parts of the government have been working on their game for decades, maybe even longer. They've built up a system that's really stuck in place, hard to spot, and almost impossible to take down. This definitely raises some big questions about the future of American democracy and whether everyday people can really take it back. One thing that could come from Levin's claims is that people might get more cynical and disillusioned. If Americans start thinking their government is totally run by secret elites, it could lead to a lot of people just checking out and not caring about politics anymore. Voter turnout, which is already a struggle in many elections, could drop even more as folks lose faith in the idea that their vote actually matters. On the flip side, Levin's revelations could spark some intense political movements on both the left and the right, as people start calling for major changes to the system. We might see new political parties or groups pop up that are all about being anti-establishment, rejecting both the Democrats and Republicans as part of the problem. These movements could push for more transparency and accountability, trying to break down the control that's been set up. But honestly, with how deep and complicated the system is that Levin talks about, it's hard to say if these movements would really take off or if they'd just end up getting pulled into the same mess they're trying to fight against. Another thing to think about is how Levin's claims could affect how the U.S. is viewed around the world. If people see the U.S. government as being run by hidden elites, it could really hurt America's credibility globally. The U.S. has always prided itself on being a leader in democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. But if our own government is seen as compromised, it makes it tough to promote those values elsewhere. This might even lead to a drop in American soft power, since other countries might start questioning whether the U.S. should be in a leadership role. By the way, if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how you think this secret will impact public trust in the government. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.